can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues.
David, it's lovely for you to come and talk to us in our early years as this wonderful education show, and we're called "It's Your Time You're Wasting." And of course, it's been quite a wait coming into this interview, I believe. So
thanks for inviting me.
That's all right, David. It's a real honour to have you here because this book is superb, and I've been dipping in and out of it, as you can tell with all the post-it notes around the side here. Head, hand, heart. Tell me, what do you mean?
Okay. I mean, this is a sort of second volume, you might say, a follow-up book to my last book, The Road to Somewhere, which was about the value divides in British society, or more broadly, I think, in rich liberal democracies, the value divides that have led to the kind of political alienation and events like Brexit and Trump. It was an attempt to kind of sort of sympathetically understand what's been going on through the prism of value divides. I talked about the anywheres and the somewheres, the more mobile, liberal, educated, and the more rooted, people who valued familiarity and who felt sort of connected to particular places. And that's sort of where and this book is sort of pulling the camera back and digging a bit deeper into that whole story, through the idea that, particularly in the last 30 or 40 years, we've become a kind of monoculture, that one form of human aptitude, the aptitudes connected to head, not just head, I mean, obviously head, hand, and heart are involved in almost everything we do. I mean, they're slightly artificial distinctions, but the cognitive ability and a particular kind of analytical kind of essay writing ability has become the gold standard of human esteem and drawn prestige away from hand, manual, technical craft, caring, nurturing, emotional intelligence, the aptitudes connected with hand and heart. And I mean, of course, at a certain sort of higher level, I mean, you might say, you know, for the last several thousand years of human history, reinforced perhaps by Christianity, the idea that knowledge, that reason, that the kind of the head was elevated above the corrupt and compromised embodied self. This is a very, very old story in many ways. But what's happened, I think, in the last 30 or 40 years is that we've developed systems of mass higher education in which certain kinds of aptitude have been, I think, sort of over-promoted in many ways, particularly in recent times, and others have been neglected. And not only that, but the idea of what it is to lead a successful life has become narrower, I think. It has become based around passing exams at school, going to a good university, having a more or less successful professional career. Not only that, but there's also we've seen the development of basically a kind of single ladder up into the zone of safety and success through the modern higher education system, whereas there used to be lots of little ladders up. And it used to be possible to get promotion from below. You know, even if you hadn't done particularly well at school, but you were a perfectly capable person, you'd be spotted and you would be promoted up the organisation. Now you have to, in most organisations, 40% of jobs are now graduate only. Many organisations, you do not have that promotion from below opportunity. Now, many people feel excluded many perfectly capable, intelligent people feel excluded by the system of kind of mass credentialization, you might say. And my point, I mean, just finally on this little introduction, I mean, my point is not only that this has got out of kilter, but that we've now reached peak head, and we cannot and will not go further down this path. And you know, when I started writing the book, I did think it was the head, hand, heart was a slightly idealistic notion. You know, it is turns out, I discovered while writing it, that it is the motto of Bedale School, the progressive English private school. But the more I researched the book as I went along, the more I realized that this is going to happen anyway, because it turns out the knowledge economy doesn't need that many knowledge work. I mean, that's the sort of crucial social fact that our politics hasn't yet absorbed. I mean, so much of our politics, our education politics, our social mobility politics, even our kind of economic and productivity politics, is based on the idea of this ever-expanding sort of cognitive professional class. And it is, I mean, it's slowed down dramatically actually over the last 20 years. I mean, I think the proportion of people in the top two social classes, essentially the kind of higher managerial professional class and the lower managerial professional class, has gone up, I think, from about 35% of the population in 2000 to 37% of the population now. So you're already seeing, and you've got other signs of this, even before the real emergence of AI, artificial intelligence, into the middling and lower cognitive jobs. Even before that, you've got these signs of the declining graduate income premium, the fact that 35% of graduates are not in graduate employment, and that's even with this very elastic and loose definition of what graduate employment is. But 35% of graduates are not in graduate employment up to 10 years after graduation. So you're already seeing this sort of, Phil Brown and Hugh Lauder talk about digital Taylorism, and lots of the jobs the graduates are going into are essentially no better paid or higher status than the jobs that their non-graduate parents went into. And so you've also got, so this is becoming increasingly dysfunctional, both economically but also politically, because it's creating a massive crisis of expectations. I mean, we've got a sort of what one might call a kind of mass elite overproduction, has kind of emerged in recent years, and that's creating, it's potentially politically unstable. I mean, I think it's one of the factors behind things like the Sanders movement in the US, and perhaps even the sort of Jeremy Corbyn momentum movement in the UK. Kids, often from lower middle class, working class backgrounds, first to university in their family, and they find they're not getting the high status, high paid employment they were expecting. And I think this is building up serious problems for the future.
I like the description you say, peak head. There's a great figure in your book about Sheffield's, that in 1976 there were 45,000 steelworkers there and 4,000 students, and in 2017 there were 60,000 students and 5,000 steelworkers. So I think that encapsulates quite a lot of what you're saying in terms of the changeover over the last few years. I think you take about 50 years you're talking about, I think.
But a lot of this has happened very quickly as well, and very recently. I mean, you go back only 30 or 40 years, and it was a very, very different kind of world. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and I'm interested in some things you're saying, because I think class does come into this, and the esteem that you get with certain jobs comes into it. But you point out in the book that bus drivers and care workers perhaps have a lower status. They're certainly not paid so well, but they have high cognitive skills to do those jobs. But then again, are we getting caught up with the idea that cognitive skills are what gives a job its kudos, if you like?
Well, no, I don't think they do necessarily have high cognitive skills. I mean, obviously every job requires some degree of cognitive skill, but they need, you need quick reactions. You need, to be, I've got a borrowed from another book, this marvelous description of a bus driver driving from Croydon to Brixton, or Brixton to Croydon in the rush hour, and all of the kind of decisions that he or she is having to make, on the hoof. It's extremely, you've got a bus full of 80 people. You're having to drive the thing. You're having to decide who to allow on and off. I mean, this is a highly responsible and quite complex job to do. And the average pay of a London bus driver, I think, is about 29, 30 grand. Compare that to, I don't know, it's a junior account manager in a city PR firm, who'll probably be on, 40, 45 grand. These sort of distributional issues are not just to do with head, hand and heart, although I think they have something to do, as you say, some of it's to do with class, some of it's to do with just the proximity to finance. Anything related to finance tends to be very well paid. And if you're close to that great sort of Ganges of money, it's sort of, you benefit from small little rivulets that flow off it.
Funny that, isn't it?
But no, I think no. But actually, there's a really interesting. I think we have cognitive creep. I talk about the sort of cognitive takeover over the last 30 or 40 years, and actually, it's a really good example. If you ask an economist, why is it that people in care homes are so poorly paid, they will say because anybody can do it. And when they say that, what they mean is that they're judging that job by cognitive standards when it should be judged actually by other standards, the sort of emotional intelligence standards. But we don't have easy. One of the reasons why the cognitive meritocracy has sort of swept all before it is because it's so easy to measure, or it seems so easy to measure. You know, in SATs tests, IQ tests, exams, you know, it seems fair. Now, obviously, there are inherited biases. You know, people who are more affluent or whose parents have gone to elite universities are more likely to go to them. You know, private tutors, blah blah blah. So there are obviously biases in it. But at a certain sort of fundamental level, it is quantifiably fair. In a way, but it's partly that we haven't worked out systems of sort of differentiating and judging other human functions. So when the economist says anyone can do it, we know that's not true. You only have to spend 10 minutes in a hospital or a care home to know that, like in any other walk of life, there are good carers, there are okay carers, and there are pretty crap carers. But because it's sort of harder to judge, whether it's at kind of interview stage or promotion stage or kind of any stage, it's harder to quantify. Something like care is a very elusive and hard to measure thing. And I think there are people kind of in the NHS who are kind of working out how to do it better. You can measure the performance of a surgeon. You can't measure the performance of a nurse so easily. And that's partly because we just haven't tried hard enough. So I think, you know, just final point here. I mean, the point about, my book is part of a whole spate of recent books that have been quite skeptical about meritocracy. But I think in a way I'm kind of more optimistic about it. I mean, you've got Michael Sandel has a book just out now. You had Daniel Markovitz's book, The Meritocracy Trap. You've had what's his name, Thomas Frank has done a sort of book about populism in the US. I mean, all of these books, including mine, were sort of skeptical about meritocracy. But I think I'm sort of mainly skeptical about meritocracy. I'm more skeptical about cognitive meritocracy. I mean, so it's not so much that I want to abolish meritocracy. Obviously, we can't. I mean, particularly at the level of selection for jobs. Obviously, everybody, I mean, even Michael Young believed that you have to have meritocratic selection for jobs, particularly for top jobs. That doesn't mean to say that you want a meritocratic society. Now, this is quite a subtle distinction, which makes kind of anti-meritocracy politics rather hard, because you know, the man or woman on the street, if you sort of say that, well, of course we're in favour of, you know, the best nuclear physicist should be running your nuclear research program. You know, you don't want to be operated on by someone who's failed their surgery exams. You know, obviously you want the best people in the right jobs, but we're not in favour of a meritocratic society. Now, I believe there is a distinction between those two things, but it's quite a hard one to sell. I mean, when I say we don't want a meritocratic society, we do not want to turn society into a competition in which the most able win and everybody else feels like losers. I mean, that is the sort of primary insight of the meritocracy critics. But they kind of slightly gloss over the fact that we need meritocratic selection for most important things. And so, I mean, I think I'm slightly more optimistic. You know, that they tend to be very good on the critical diagnosis, but don't really have a kind of answer beyond traditional democratic ones. You know, pay people doing care jobs more, which of course I go along with too. But I think this idea that it's not just that we want to, as it were, balance merit with a recognition of the fact that all humans have value and should earn a decent wage so long as they're making a social contribution. I mean, that is true, but also we actually need to spread the idea of meritocracy into these other areas and not focus exclusively on the cognitive meritocracy.
Yeah, no, I certainly get that, but we still go back to this problem, I suppose. I mean, in a recent review, you were described as being one of the foremost intellectuals in the country, maybe in Europe. And
I laughed. I laughed when I read that. My kids were absolutely appalled.
you went to
my head. Well, not too much anyway.
You went to one of the top, most famous schools in the country, which
that's true.
Give you grace, you mentioned this in the book, of course, and also your education in a Russell Group university. Are you an example of the problem or the solution to the problem? And is it, you mentioned, and again, you have good grace to talk about this in the book. So, you know, this is not news to you. You talk about other people's children as a thing as well. Yeah. Is hand and heart for other people's children, but still in North London, in a certain sort of metropolitan liberal elite, to throw in the anywheres sort of idea, is it still peak head not reached for them? It's going to keep going, and it's going to be head all the way for them, and it is hand and heart for the others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a problem, and that, you know, and that is one of the reasons why, you know, the cognitive meritocracy has gone unchallenged, is because, you know, whether because the political class, the media class, overwhelmingly, you know, able people mainly, who almost all are graduates, you know, regardless of their social class background, and whether they're from working class background or from my sort of privileged upper middle class background. You know, their children almost universally go to, you know, good universities and so on, and so they haven't. I mean, there's actually I have a little passage in the book. Paul Johnson, the guy who runs the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has described. I mean, you know, he was very much one of those sorts of people. He himself, I think, went to Oxford or Cambridge. His eldest son did the same. He had another son though who wasn't so academically able, and he was involved one Christmas in trying to find him an apprenticeship in I think sort of software development, or, you know, something that apparently there's a huge demand for. And he sort of said how incredibly complex and difficult it is, and how seldom it is that people who run the country actually sort of, you know, experience the other forms of post-school education apart from the, you know, the wonderfully signposted, still hugely subsidized path, massive, great motorway route into higher education. That's the easy one. That's the one that everyone who runs the country knows. That's where their children go, and it's true of me as well. And I think that, I think and hope this is beginning to change. Obviously, you know, I mean, class impacts on these things, status impacts upon it. I mean, and this. You know, I mean, David Willits and me have been arguing about these things, and he's always sort of implying, oh, well, it's all right. You know, you're perfectly happy for the kind of elite. You know, why are you being so tough on the kind of new universities and allowing the elite Russell Group research universities off scot-free? Well, I'm not. I mean, I actually say in the book, I think a lot of the new universities add more value often than the Russell Group universities, where you know, people like my kids who, you know, who've been privately educated at secondary level, you know, float into these places, don't necessarily do, you know, huge amounts of work. I mean, there's a huge difference actually between, you know, the amount of work you do at a, you know, at a Manchester or a Bristol compared to Oxford or Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge, they actually still make them work. I mean, in a way that doesn't seem to be true in my experience anyway of the other Russell Group universities. But I mean, I think, you know, I mean, Willits gets a bit sort of class obsessed about this issue. I mean, I think, you know, we need, if anything, we need a kind of smaller cognitive elite, as open and meritocratic as possible. So, you know, if working class kids are very, you know, academically capable, then the sky should be the limit. You know, and the more of them that go to elite universities, the better. Absolutely, but we're sending lots and lots of people who are of only moderate cognitive ability into the university sector, and you know, while at the same time we have massive skill shortages in skilled trades, in the middling technical functions, you know, so-called level 4, level 5. You know, hundreds of thousands of people used to do HNDs and HNCs. It's down to a trickle now, and there are massive shortages there. Not to mention the recruitment crises in care and nursing and so on. So we just got things out of kilter. And I mean, and sorry, just a final point on status. I mean, people like Willits accuse me of being, you know, wanting to sort of turn the clock back and sort of, and indeed, I spoke to one director of or BC actually, of a new university a couple of years ago about it, and they sort of said, you know, please don't tear off our epaulets. You know, this idea that, you know, they've you know, since 1992, you know, they've shrugged off the low status polytechnic label, and they've acquired this marvelous prestigious university label, and, you know, and they don't want to be sent back down the pecking order. I mean, this is, you know, this is their class obsession. I mean, this is their status obsession. I'm not, you know, of course, these institutions should remain universities. I mean, partly for status reasons, perhaps, but why? I mean, my argument is that they should become much more flexible. I mean, they should go back, you know, to providing, you know, the sandwich courses, the the 18-month diplomas, the precisely for to fill this level 4, level 5 gap. And they should do it in proper collaboration with the FE sector. I mean, at the moment, the FE sector, I think, feels that they are the equivalent of social care in education. I mean, they are the real Cinderella sector, and they get bullied by the universities, because they don't have degree awarding powers themselves. All these sort of sub-degree qualifications. They end up having to pay the universities to just sort of rubber stamp the training that they've done. But if we are going to invest more in level 4, level 5 type, the so-called missing middle, then we need to sort of bang the heads together of HE and FE and make sure that we have that they're working in the public interest.
I'm interested there. I mean, particularly because I actually went to a polytechnic, so I can wave that flag quite happily.
Which one did you go to?
East London, as it was then.
Oh, right.
It was North East London. Sorry, North East London Poly. NELP. Help.
Right. Just down the Holloway Road. Yeah. It's now London Met.
It's in Stratford. So it's University of East London now. So,
okay. Right.
Yeah. So
the University of East London. Right. Yeah.
So Leytonstone and Stratford, right. That area, all the way to Romford. This has huge implications for education, the education system. But still, you talk about a smaller cognitive elite. You're still talking about a cognitive elite. And how can a school, let's say in Romford or in Blackpool or somewhere, compete with a school like Eton and get, someone who's of mediocre intelligence going to Eton is still probably going to do better than someone of high intelligence who perhaps goes to use the phrase, bog standard comprehensive in Blackpool or Romford? Isn't that the most likely outcome that there is now? And how can that be changed in any way without huge ructions to getting rid of public schools or whatever? Can you do a true meritocracy there?
Yeah, I mean, this is why we will always have a partial and flawed meritocracy. I mean, meritocracy is not a good ideal because turning society into a competition at the most able when everyone else feels like a failure is not a bad idea. But it also doesn't work in practice, or rather, it only partially works in practice. Now, I mean, in many ways, it's better to have a mass elite than a narrow elite. But I mean, if focusing just on the cognitive side of it, we have a mass cognitive elite, much of which is not actually functioning at a very high cognitive level, as I've already discussed. But I mean, if you have a free society in which parents are able to hand down advantage to their children, then meritocracy will always be partial and flawed. And no doubt we can do better than we're doing at the moment. You could close the private schools, but there are lots of very class divided societies that don't have private education or don't have a significant private sector as we do. But advantage is still passed on through all sorts of things. I mean, the way children are brought up, private tutors, the fact that you're talked to more, 3 million more words by the age of 3, or all these things. Now, I mean, I'm not in favour of of leaving the system as it is. I mean, I think we could do more. We have pupil premiums. I mean, they pre-COVID. I mean, there was some evidence that gaps were narrowing between social classes in this country. We know the story. Many ethnic minority groups have done very well in the education system in the last 20 years. Which is revealed in the London figures. So I don't think we've done too badly on some of these things. Obviously, there are biases. There are privileged kids who still waltz through the system. But those things are always going to happen in a free society. So I mean, I'm concentrating on sort of something slightly different, which is making people feel sort of, giving people meaning and purpose in their lives, and not making them feel if they don't do well in the classroom, that's it. And I think, going back 30, 40 years, there kind of were more options because you know, leaving school and you went and you did an apprenticeship, and like I say, you know, if you were able, I mean, it's also kind of learning by doing. I mean, I've got a little story in the book about a friend of mine from Huddersfield who ended up being very successful. He became quite a big figure in the labour movement. He was deputy general secretary of the building union, UCAT, a man called Paul Corby. He went to, he failed his 11 plus, so he didn't go to Harold Wilson's famous Huddersfield Grammar School. He went to the secondary modern and learned very little. It was pretty chaotic, didn't learn any algebra, geometry. He then, you know, at the age of 15, he leaves, he does an apprenticeship at J. Wim Penny, big local builder. You know, within sort of 6 months or so, he's using Pythagoras's theorem to lay his bricks and to build houses. And, you know, he had no problem learning that at all. You know, it's the Gilbert Ryle knowing that and knowing how distinction. You know, we have such a bias towards the knowing that in our culture. I mean, I think it's partly to do with the way that Oxbridge dominated educational culture, you know, from when they finally modernised at the end of the 19th century, and then through the A-level system that has been. Now, you know, I'm in favour. I mean, I'm a Govian. I mean, I think, you know, Gove's reforms were great. I mean, I'm very much in favour of you know, as high as possible academic standards. You know, let's stop mucking about with all this sort of grade inflation, and you know, let's be as rigorous as possible. You know, I mean, you know, let's have more Mossborns and Michaelas. Absolutely. But I do also think that School 21 is onto something. You know, sort of what is their motto? You know, the I can't remember, but it's sort of, you know, they are a kind of head, hand, heart school. I mean, we should have the highest possible academic standards, but we should apply those high standards also to what used to be regarded as the softer subjects, you know, creative subjects, you know, you know, art and music and sport are also, you know, incredibly important things, and more important, you know, as the robots take over more and more of old style work. So I mean, I don't think these things, I mean, you know, superficially what I'm saying may sound slightly sort of contrary to the kind of, you know, E.D. Hirsch sort of Gove analysis, but I'm a great fan of that analysis. But I think it's not incompatible with acknowledging a wider spread of human aptitudes and talents, and working on those as hard as we do on, you know, biology and French.
I'm glad you brought this up, because I do think it's a really interesting dichotomy that you're straddling in the book. I mean, if we bring in Gove and the idea of the EBAC, of course, famously doesn't include the arts.
Yeah.
So for you know, for reasons, and there were reasons why that was at the time, and it hasn't become something that every student has to pass, so to speak, in the way that it's more about what a school is doing and what a school is providing. But you've got that quote which you've referred to there: in our robotic future, a broad education that includes plenty of music, sport, dance, drama and art is more necessary than ever. And, you know, as an arts teacher, I cheered when I read that. Of course, this is what I believe in a lot. But have we got space for all these things that you're trying to bring out here? Because there's also technology. What about, you know, all the craft subjects that could be in the curriculum that are no longer as highly thought of as they used to be? Whether it be, I think Winston Churchill laid bricks, didn't he? Wasn't he a bricklayer at some point?
Yeah.
All these
he did it as a hobby, I think, later in life. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, perhaps.
Should we be bringing back metalworking and carpentry?
Yeah, metalwork, woodwork. Can you do a dovetail joint? You know, all these important things, and
I assume have largely disappeared from the curriculum, or have they? I mean,
very much so, and certainly. Things like DT are on a carousel, you know, so you do lots of things for about 6 weeks in year 8, and then you forget about it for another few weeks before you come back to it. Then I
mean, I think I have a proposal in the book which is perhaps a slightly unfeasible one, but that everybody should leave school with at least one non-academic skill honed to quite a high level. And that might involve, and this could also be quite good for kind of social and indeed ethnic integration, that you do something off campus, as it were, off the school campus, in somewhere, I mean, local FE college, or wherever, and you can choose, it could be, well, I was going to say arts related, but you want art still to be done in the school itself. But I mean, it could be, say, something to learning how to code or something. You do it once a week. You go and you do it with kids from other schools in the neighbourhood, yeah. So you come, you leave school at whatever age, whether you leave school at 16 or 18, and you have one, you have one kind of manual technical type skill that you've also mastered to, and it could be cooking, or it could be carpentry or something. You don't necessarily want to bring those back into the national curriculum, but they could be done at some corner of school time, perhaps in another place, let's say. I mean, yeah, that may be slightly to the birds, but I think some of these things might be feasible in some places.
It's just having them on the curriculum is one thing, which they are, but it's so minute that you don't get. So to actually have one of those to come through, and again, it's how these things are selected. Do you self-select? Therefore, do you have the choice there to at least experience them before you self-select them, and things like that? I mean, there are huge issues, obviously, as you say so yourself there. The overall aim, one of wisdom, and you touch on this near the end of the book, and drawing on Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed and Ian McGilchrist, Master and His Emissary, which I think both those books are superb as well. And the ideas of perspectivism, cognitive diversity, collective ideas, cross-domain knowledge, all these things, which sort of points for me, and I think you also talk about this in the book, about A levels, the restriction of 3 A levels for most people, where I prefer something like, well, the IB, the baccalaureate, the proper baccalaureate, which really does have an expanse of education, which again could include technical, could include vocational work as well, and does in various places. How do you see this utopian view? Let's say we give you all the power in the world. What would you do to the education system to help us create, and not just the system, of course, ending at 18. I think you talk about it going through life as well. There's a lifelong learning and things like that. How would you see it all if you had all the power?
Well, I think like I say, I mean, I'd want to keep a lot of what the kind of rigor and much of the thinking behind the Gove reforms, I think, are absolutely on the money. But I do, I would want to introduce, I would want to include in that many of the art subjects that have been, as you say, excluded recently. I would want to bring back some sort of manual technical skill. Again, as I say, not necessarily into the curriculum, but perhaps done away from the school once a week for a couple of hours. And provide a somewhat broader sort of playing field in which kids, a variety of kids' aptitudes can develop. And the academic should take priority. Getting people as far along, on the academic basics as far along as possible, and we're still absolutely terrible. I mean, what is it? Sort of something like 20% of kids still leave school, almost innumerate and illiterate. I mean, I'm not playing down the getting the basics right. We've still got a long way to go on getting the basics right, and getting teaching and outcomes up to something like there are obviously schools like Michaela and Mossbourne are obviously outliers. and they have, you know, they have very sort of specific sort of traditions, as it were, and histories. One can't spread that, alas, one can't sort of spread that throughout the system, but one can make some effort to. But while also not neglecting, you know, and perhaps including some sort of, you know, some sort of mindfulness teaching in schools. You know, mental fragility is a much bigger issue now, and I don't think it's just because we're a less sort of resilient and stiff upper lip society. I think there are genuine issues about modern society and the constant comparisons reinforced by social media and so on. You know, mental fragility is a real issue. So perhaps, you know, certain basic aspects of mindfulness could be taught in school. Well, I mean, I know, you know, poor old schools, everything gets loaded onto schools, you know, to solve all of humanity's problems. But I mean, I think it is possible to, I suppose all I'm really saying is that it is possible to combine, you know, academic rigor with you know, respect for creativity, you know, in the curriculum too, and respect for manual and indeed emotional learning should be in there too, perhaps to a greater extent than it currently is. You know, and then, you know, we're kind of moving through the system, as you say. I mean, lifelong learning, we've been going back on in recent years. I mean, people talk about lifelong learning the whole time, but I mean, I think it's ridiculous you know, that we send so many kids into higher education at the age of 18, 19. I mean, let's spread it out through a lifetime more. I mean, you know, by all means, let's have as many people going to university as can actually benefit from it, not just going to university in order to get the credentials, because 40% of jobs are now graduate only. I can see exactly why people feel they have to go. I mean, not only is it, you know, back to the Paul Johnson example, not only is it so much sort of simpler, it's what all middle class and increasingly working class parents want their kids to do. The kids want to do it often because, you know, we're international outliers. We're international outliers in two respects. One, the number of kids who go to residential universities, it's about 80%. I think that has contributed. I mean, kind of wonderful experience though it is for many people. I mean, it's an experience I had, and perhaps an experience you had. I don't know. Did you board at East London?
I lived in a squat. Does that count?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But so yeah, we're absolutely international outliers on that, and there are a lot of good things to be said for it. And indeed, one of the things I'm kind of thinking about, you know, how does one replicate that experience? I mean, indeed, there are lots of people like David Soskis, one of the people who I quoted in the book. He was behind the original sort of Tony Blair, let's send 50% of the school leavers to university. He was he was an academic who was involved with a lot of those arguments. He actually says that he thinks the most valuable thing of all about university is the 3 years, you know, away from parents, learning how to get on with people who are very different to you, you know, organizing a university society meeting, etc., etc. These sorts of social, almost political skills that can be learned at university are extremely valuable. But then why shouldn't the 60% of kids who don't go to university also have the opportunity to have that, perhaps through some sort of, you know, perhaps you could have residential apprenticeships maybe. But mind you, as I say, we're an absolute international outlier in the proportion who do go to residential universities. I think it contributes to the value divides in our society. So I think we should sort of, and the other way that we're an international outlier is in the undifferentiated nature of our post-school education. I mean, you know, you either do an apprenticeship, which very few kids do leaving school. Only about 7 or 8% of kids go into apprenticeships from school. I mean, or you go into work, or you go to university. There isn't the, you know, ever since '92 and the polytechnics were turned into universities. Most other countries still have some kind of distinct kind of technical, higher technical. And they give prestige. So the polytechnics actually gave prestige to technical, you know, more kind of technical engineering as opposed to academic engineering or whatever. And it's the academicization of vocational courses that has been going on in the new universities. I think it's, you know, I mean, first of all, they're residential when perhaps they shouldn't be. And that has its good points, as I say, but it can also be very divisive nationally. They they have there's a lack of flexibility because they're classical universities. They all, it's all 3-4 year courses taught by academics, many of whom would far prefer to be doing their research. They're not necessarily very good teachers, or they're not selected on their teaching ability. And then you get that lack of flexibility and the academicization. You're doing construction management course at Sheffield Hallam. You mentioned Sheffield Hallam. You're doing writing lots of essays on sort of general business subjects. You're probably not spending very much time on an actual construction site. Now, that maybe has something to be said for it, but it's universities finding something to do. 30 years ago, construction managers probably mainly kind of came up through the ranks and went off and perhaps did a part-time diploma at night school or whatever. Were construction sites are they better managed today with people who've done 3-4 year degrees? I very much doubt it.
I couldn't possibly comment. But the idea of people leaving school still, though, at 18, 19 with a bunch of
you've got some
complications,
and then you're going to get so much more out of it. I mean, most kids who go to university at the age of 18 or 19 are not particularly academic. I mean, they're clever enough kids, but they're doing it to jump through the hoops. They're not going to, because they love George Eliot and reading Middlemarch, or because they're absolutely fascinated by Sanskrit, or they're not going out of academic curiosity. They're going because they have to in order to get the jobs they want. I mean, this is not learning for its own sake any longer. Well, why not? Why postpone it, so that, and then later on in life, you do have a real. I mean, either because you want to further, perhaps you go off and you do a software apprenticeship, and then after a few years, you actually get more interested in kind of what you're actually doing and the kind of underlying maths of it or whatever, and you go off and do a computer science degree, and then you can and that can enhance your career. Or you just
league tables matter here, though. The fact that we try and squeeze kids to the highest grade possible, which looks good for the school, that's part of the credentials of the school matter here, and whether the enthusiasm for the subject goes, because the enthusiasm is not for the subject anymore, it's for the grade.
Well, I mean, the two don't have to be mutually exclusive, do they? And I mean, and the new grading system is at least, I think, slightly fairer in principle, isn't it? I mean, so you're not, there aren't all those incentives just to sort of push a certain cohort of kids over the C mark into a B or whatever it is.
Progress date. It's a controversial. It's a controversial thing, of course, but
but so from what I understand of it, it does seem a slightly fairer system, but. I mean, the whole, this in a way is what I'm writing about, and of course it's not all a terrible thing, but the whole machine has become so oriented to one set of outcomes and one set of goals, and they're all to do with cognitive ability. They're all to do with sending as many kids as possible, not just to university now, but to the best universities, and not everybody can do that. I mean, that and that's another reason for wanting to sort of spread the idea of merit and status to the other human functions that are still absolutely so vital, and it's so vital that they're done well, and we seem to have kind of we seem to have just got things out of kilter and rather lost sight of that.
David, I could talk to you for hours about this excellent book, Head, Hand, Heart. David Goodhart. Please get yourself a copy. It's well worth reading, but not only is it well worth reading, as you can tell from this conversation, it's well worth thinking about and cogitating and, perhaps work it over with your hands, feeling it in your heart, but also think about it in your head. So thank you for that, David. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
You can run and hide, but you will find that where you go, the blues go. You may think you're